Hello, my name is Luis Murillo. I work in the support team at GeneXus, and today we're going to talk about legacy modernization with GeneXus. First of all, we're going to give you a little framework in terms of what we are talking about when we talk about legacy modernization. When we say modernization of legacy systems, we're not talking about anything else other than automating business processes in our companies according to the state of the technologies of nowadays. Maybe 20, 30 years ago, you could think of getting to a company and in order to automate their business processes, you could say, well, let's start from scratch or let's um, just erase everything that has been done. But all companies nowadays have some degree of automation. I'd like to say that there's nothing like a green field. That means that when we automate business processes, every company will already have systems that are supporting their businesses. And our challenge is how we're going to tackle that reality. So allow me to tell you a story about this talk of an IT manager that contacted us some time ago that was facing these problems. Whether this is a fictitious or real story is irrelevant because it's a story based on the many cases that we have found in this reality. Well, you will be the judges at the end of the talk and you will tell me whether or not that is something that has happened to you. I hope that you will tell that it is, but what really matters here is whether or not you're going through a similar situation and how important it would be for you to realize about this if maybe you know a company or person that is going through a situation like this. So, legacy modernization is the name that marketing teams uh, gave us in order to conceptualize this reality. So, these are systems that are working today that to some extent are satisfactory in terms of the business requirements, but they have some problematics. Now, also, marketing teams have invented another slogan which is called digital transformation. And this is how, through the automation of business processes, you can have your industry or your business use the state of the art technology to get value on a daily basis with your business. So, how do you allow these two to coexist? These are antagonic concepts? No, by no means. Uh, in GeneXus, modernizing these legacy systems is a way to digital transformation, which is what's going to allow us to start a new path of digital transformation with our company systems. The issue here is where in our business do we find value? Well, we believe that to a large extent, this is in our digital assets. But what do we mean by this? Basically, we have two main pillars of digital assets that we have in our companies. First of all, we have data. Data that are greatly part of these legacy systems. And also, we have the hidden logics, which we have in the programs developed in these legacy systems. This is all a way of hiding in the systems that support the management of my business that knowledge that is part of processes or knowledge that belongs to the very business, or sometimes it is users' knowledge, the users of my system. That means those people that have developed these systems. So, our approach at GeneXus in terms of the systems that we have to develop is to save all this knowledge and to have a repository where you can store these digital assets. And this is what we call in GeneXus a knowledge base. Projects in GeneXus have this knowledge base name precisely because it is a knowledge base. It is a place where you're formalizing and storing all the knowledge that you have so that it will persist. And over time, you will get value from it. Now we're going to take a look at a demo, which, well, I'm going to use a tool that we have in GeneXus since the early beginnings. And this is, I call it that it's a tool that is not always valued according to its value, which is the database reverse engineering. This is a feature in GeneXus that allows us to read these databases designed by third parties, and it allows us to formalize all the knowledge and obtain a data model that will be understood by GeneXus. And based on that pillar, you can build state-of-the-art systems. So, what was the real problem with this CEO of the company that contacted us and that was in this conundrum that he could not solve? Well, the system was dealing with the functionalities that it was expected to, but the UX was prehistoric. It was bad. It had been developed in languages that are no longer used today and that wouldn't allow for growth. RPG, COBOL. It was impossible to find today developers to understand those programs and to eventually write new stuff. So there were technologies that could not be implemented because it didn't support it. These systems that supported the business did not support those new languages. So, and several of these problems that you can see here on the screen. Certainly, many of you, or at least some of you, are facing this today. So quickly, we're going to move on to the demo of how we overcame this with GeneXus for this client. So we started from this. These were the screens that our client had. These screens were meeting the requirements, but as you can see, these were prehistoric, rigid, green screens. And we said, okay, with GeneXus, we're going to quickly change that UX so that we can have screens that look like this, and to offer mobile solutions that their users or their clients could use and take advantage of. And all of this would stand on this legacy system that was already up and running. So let's move to the demo that I've told you about. This was the system that we saw when a client contacted us. It was done in RPG, where developers were no longer in the company. As you can see, this is an e-banking system that basically is used by your bank users with their accounts and their balance. And just as an example, maybe other menus, you can see here the different transfers, money transfers that are made between accounts. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a project, and based on this, using the Diveret tool, we're going to connect to read the tables of this legacy system. Once that Diveret reads the tables of this legacy system, it will offer us a data model in which you will be able to support the system that you're going to be developing on top of the legacy system. So Diveret is detecting the tables, the users, the accounts, and also the transactions, and it's going to define, based on these tables, that as a developer of modern technologies, maybe you don't know what it was like to read a table back in the day, which is an RPG table, but Diveret does have that knowledge, and it can read it, and it will find attributes that have the same name, and it will be considered as the same concept. And GeneXus is going to read these tables, and it will create, for the same, transactions that are associated to the existing tables in your legacy system. And with these transactions, what you will do is you will generate all the new user experience by reading the data of the legacy system. As you can see, we have the attributes for each transaction. And next, what we have is we can graphically see what is the data model inferred by GeneXus based on these tables. So as a developer now, I have a user-friendly way of observing the data model that my legacy system had. And I see that I have a table that is related to the user table, and I have a transfer table that is not related whatsoever to these other two tables. So as a developer, I can realize, or I can talk to people that work in the company to try to detect that the bank transaction table needs to have a correlation with the accounts table, and I detect that there are two fields which are the account number, the person that is sending the money, and also the account number of the receiving account, that even though they have different names here, they make reference to bank accounts. So I will define two subtypes. In GeneXus, this means that you're telling it that even though these fields in the original tables have different names, conceptually speaking, for my data model, they will be the same field. So you define two subtypes, the sender and the receiver, that will refer to the same field, which is an account number. Once you've done that, you will see that GeneXus will quickly detect that then now there is a correlation between these two tables, the table of money transfers and to the tables of bank accounts. Therefore, it's going to consider these two tables as relational. What we do then, once we have managed to indicate this relationship, we add more to the interface. So in the currency transfer transaction part, we will also add the name of each of the accounts, the sender account and the receiver account. So we're adding more richness to the UI. And at the same time, we will be able to add the username in the account table, because GeneXus detects that the user ID that was in that table is the same user ID of a user. So if you go back to the diagram, you see that the data model is richer. There is that correlation between the three tables. And if you run the system, you will see that you have a web interface that is much more user-friendly, that we're having access to it. As you can see, this is real time. So we're having access to the same data of the iSeries system with a green screen, which is what's supporting the business today. So you see that the data that you're seeing in this web application are the same data that you would find in the green screen system. And all of this is automatically solved by GeneXus. Now, once we've done this, what we will see is that we can add much more richness to this system that we are modernizing in a way. And for this, we have an approximation to pattern-based development. So to all these transactions, we will add this pattern that we call work with, and just by clicking twice and applying patterns to all three transactions and just customizing some little things, you will see that you have a much more user-friendly menu that is adding information, that is allowing you to see much richer information, that you can interact with the same data, and even that without having to program a single line of code, you're getting screens where you can see the relations between data, the connections that you have between user accounts and users themselves, which are those that have those named accounts. As a matter of fact, from here, you may not just visualize it, but you can create a new piece of data. You can create a new user as part of the system that you have just developed in this way, which is very agile and very rich in terms of the interface. And this same information is going to be interacting with the same tables in your legacy system. So these data that you're inserting here in this web system is not inserting a new user in the tables of your legacy system. If you go to the RPG system, these data that you have inserted from the web system and you developed with 2 clicks is also impacted because you are interacting on the same tables. Now, this is not the only thing that we wanted to offer our users. We can also develop new objects that will add now more richness and features to that legacy system. For instance, if you have a credit card business for my company, let's say my banking company, I can quickly create new transactions, and these new transactions will create new tables all within the same knowledge base. And these new tables now will be tables that, even though they are part of this series and they are related to the tables of the legacy system, this model, as I'm generating it now in this KB, which is C#, these will be tables that are SQL collection tables, which is a data handler, which has a much more modern technology than the other tables. So quickly, I can create two new transactions, one to have different types of credit cards, and another one to assign credit cards to users, to those users that were part of those tables in the legacy systems. And to these transactions, you're also applying the same pattern. And additionally, you can enrich your pattern even more, and you can enrich this menu even more so that you can just 2 clicks away get interfaces of the kinds of what we have just seen on the screen. If we keep on digging a little deeper in terms of the modernization that we can do to this, remember that we also offered our client an array of solutions that could be that could run on mobile. Now, to develop those mobile solutions, as we were doing this modernization process in the system, we requested our designers team that by using a sketch tool, which is a tool that designers usually manage really well, that they would do a mock-up of all the different screens and all the different interactions of this submodule for mobile in this banking case. So what we do now with GeneXus is we have this sketch that was developed by the design team. We're just importing that into the same knowledge base. By doing so, by importing this sketch design that we got from the designers, what's going to happen in GeneXus is that automatically you will generate new panels, a number of panels, and a number of test data, so that I can just import that, generate the application by clicking on F5, and GeneXus is going to be showing me a native application running on Android that meets the requirements of all the design that I was given. So as you can see here, we have already a mobile application, but if you take a look at this, the data that we can see here are not real data. The data that we are seeing are data that my design team incorporated in that design that they gave us, so that I will have a very brief mock-up and I can take a look at what the result's going to look like. But as a developer in GeneXus, what I will want to do is these test data, I will want to replace them by real data, data coming from those RBG tables that came from the legacy system. And take a look at how easy it is to do this in GeneXus. So this is the data provider that my design team gave me with some test data. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change these texts that the design team wrote by mentioning attributes. Attributes that DV-Red has inferred by reading the data model that an RPG programmer had done in the past. So here I'm just mentioning attributes, and now when I generate and execute this, when I run this, GeneXus will be able to overcome the navigation and will know how to write the REST services that will go and read these tables and will give the mobile application the real data that comes from your legacy system that is running. So this is what we're doing now. What we are doing is we're changing the test data with real attributes, and once that you run this again for your mobile application, you will see that what will appear on the screen is no longer those test data, but GeneXus knows how to read this green screen system and these tables, and they get the real data, which is what you can see in the mobile application. And this was done just by clicking twice, with a very good design and all the power that you can get from your design teams and that we as developers would never manage to imitate. So also the design team, this is something that is quite cool because it was a requirement of our clients. It says that this person wants to have their clients to have the possibility of having a chatbot with end users. So I can quickly just design in GeneXus a chatbot, but not a chatbot just like any other, but rather a chatbot that will read data from your database, and your end user in a conversational dialogue will be able to talk to your banking entity, but getting data from the legacy system. So I'll write a procedure that if I say, for example, my bank account number, it will give me the balance. And then I will design in GeneXus a chatbot with a couple of conversational flows where I'm going to present the end user with a menu so that they can have, they can choose a certain option. And if one of the options that they choose, for example, here we see that we have two dialogues in the chatbot. If one of these options is to show balance, then in that conversational flow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invoke the procedure that will read the table from my legacy system according to the user's account and their login details. It will call that procedure. It will obtain its balance as a result, and it will be shown in the chatbot on the mobile application. So this was a very brief demo for this talk, but if you really develop this whole demo, this took me less than an hour, coming from green screens all the way down to the system that I have just shown you. So with this demo that I've just shared with you, we're coming to the end of the story, but allow me to just make a final comment. There is one little extra step that we are giving our clients. The system that we modernized, the legacy system to which we applied all this new technology and we modernized, additionally, not only leaves a state-of-the-art system so that your business can be supported, but also it is what we call future-proof. Why? Because what we've done is we're storing in GeneXus all the knowledge of the business. And so this system from now on will be able to adapt and be generated automatically in the latest technologies that are coming up or that will come up in the future. Not long ago, when talking about GeneXus, someone said that with GeneXus we were giving eternal youth to our code. And I will quote that, and I will just tweak it a little bit. What we are offering with GeneXus is eternal youth to your knowledge, so that today and always, based on that knowledge, the code will be automatically generated in whichever technology you're using at different times in history. So with GeneXus, you can overcome all these problematics of not having, developers that only work in the latest technologies or better user experiences. You can see some of our clients on the screen that because they use GeneXus, they were capable of embarking upon this journey of continuously modernizing their systems, whichever technology they were written in. And now, yes, this is the end of the story. And, well, our client lived happily ever after. So these are some talks where you can delve into some of the points that we touched on in the demo. You have this slide, and you will see in further depth how to build a chatbot with GeneXus, how to have rich you in an easy way. So, well, I wanted to tell you a bit about this. Thank you so much for your time and for watching this video.